Again, thank you so much for coming to today's webinar and joining us. My name is Chloe Cerino. I'm one of the registered dietitians here at Balance Eating Disorder Treatment Center, and I'm also one of the coaches at Redefining Wellness. So today we're going to be talking all about intuitive eating and going into the 10 principles as well as some of the research behind intuitive eating. So we'll also have some time for questions at the end. So if you want to enter your questions into the little Q&A function, I'll be able to see them and I will answer them at the tail end of the presentation. So feel free to add them in throughout. So what is intuitive eating? Intuitive eating started in the mid-1990s when this first book was published. It was written by Evelyn Triboli and Elise Resch, who are both registered dietitians. The way they describe the beginning of intuitive eating really is that each of them were in their own private practices, working with clients individually, and kind of doing what we would think of as the typical dietitian nutrition counseling, which is putting their clients on individualized meal plans or different diets in hopes to help them achieve their goals, whether that was weight loss or other presumed health goals at the time. And kind of what they found is that following these structured meal plans or diets just wasn't working for their clients to help them reach their goals. So eventually the two of them met, and I guess long story short, intuitive eating was founded. So they decided that there must be a more individualized approach to eating that isn't so structured and isn't so rule-based. So they wrote this book on intuitive eating, and this was the first version of it. So intuitive eating is an anti-diet approach to nutrition. So what this means is while diets really are asking for you to follow a set of rules, so whether that's what kinds of foods to eat, when to eat, or how much food to eat, intuitive eating is really flipping that on its head and saying, we innately know what to feed ourselves and how much to feed ourselves. So it's really focusing on turning those cues to eat and also to stop eating back inward. And instead of focusing on arbitrary diet rules, really listening to our own bodies. So some of the goals of intuitive eating, again, are to turn those cues to eat and also to stop eating inward, listening to our own bodies. Eliminating the morality of foods, so not seeing any foods as good and any other foods as bad. And also to honor our hunger and fullness and also our cravings. So we will dive deeper into where these land on the 10 principles a little bit later. But this is just a brief overview of some of the goals of intuitive eating. So you might be asking yourself, why an anti-diet approach? And the truth is diets don't work. So following an anti-diet approach probably is a better option, or definitely is a better option. So research has repeatedly shown time and time again that dieting isn't a predictor for long-term weight loss. It's actually a great predictor for weight gain and also for disordered eating. So while a lot of people will lose weight on a diet initially, as many as 95% of those people will regain the weight they lost, and usually even more within a 5-year period. So this is the exact opposite of what diet culture and the diet industry tells us, right? That if you follow this diet to a T, you will lose weight and it will be sustained weight loss as long as you follow these strict rules. So what we find is that that's not a sustainable option and the weight does come back. It's also important to note that not weight itself or BMI, but actually weight stigma is a better predictor of poor health outcomes, again, than weight itself. So kind of having that stressor of feeling like you need to be in a certain body shape or size, feeling like you need to have a certain weight on the scale is a great predictor of having poor health outcomes because of the stress hormones that are released in our bodies. So it's kind of an interesting one. So intuitive eating, again, focuses on our internal cues. So those being our feelings of hunger, fullness, and satiety. So yo-yo dieting and restriction of any kind, especially long-term restriction, can really alter these cues and make them a lot harder to sense. So when you are following intuitive eating, at the beginning, it's a little bit tricky to listen to your hunger and fullness cues all the time, but they certainly do come back if this is an approach that you take as a long-term sustained eating style. So it's important to note that intuitive eating focuses on not only the feelings of physical hunger and physical fullness, but also on satiety or satisfaction as well. So sometimes we're eating and we feel physically full, but maybe not quite satisfied. And we feel that, even though I'm physically full, I could still have a few more bites of that, or, it would just make me feel really good to just eat a little bit more of my favorite food. And that's completely okay. And lastly, here, feeling full but also satisfied really does help reduce our feelings of deprivation. So, in the same way that if we physically are unable to access food, if we tell ourselves that we can't have food, or if we tell ourselves we can't have the kinds or types or quantities of food that we want, it really can have that same feeling of deprivation to our brains and to our bodies. So, a lot of people will think of intuitive eating as this approach that will tell you you can just eat whatever you want, whenever you want, and it's fine. And if you want to just eat potato chips or cookies all day, every day, that's fine. And while there is some merit to that, if that's really what your body is asking for and craving, we wouldn't tell you you couldn't do that. That's really not what happens in the long term, and we'll explore that a little bit later. And there actually are quite a few actually proven health benefits of intuitive eating. So to dive a little bit into the physical health side, we know that intuitive eaters do have a more varied diet. So what this means is while diets will tell you you can't have certain foods, for example, so say they want you to cut out all carbohydrates or whatever it might be, intuitive eating really allows you to eat all kinds of foods. And since all foods do offer us different nutrients, that really opens the door for us to have access to a whole wide variety of nutrients and give our bodies what they need. Just like we said earlier, there is decreased feelings of stress around eating when you are an intuitive eater, which in turn lowers your cortisol levels. So cortisol is the stress hormone that we have in our bodies, and cortisol is really closely correlated with inflammation, which then is tied to all kinds of chronic diseases like cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and many other chronic diseases. So if we're lowering this feeling of stress around eating, we're also lowering our cortisol, which lowers our inflammation, which has really great health benefits for us. And lastly, people who do follow an intuitive eating approach have lower triglyceride levels and higher HDL, or that good cholesterol, as well. And then some of the mental health benefits are increased pleasure in eating, increased self-esteem, and overall feelings of well-being, which I think is pretty awesome. And then also lower body dissatisfaction, so feeling more comfortable and more satisfied in your own body. And then the thing that really intersects the physical and mental health spheres is that people who follow an intuitive eating approach do have lower rates of eating disorders and disordered eating in general. So that's a really great benefit. All right, so intuitive eating is split into 10 principles. Each of them is really kind of a pillar or a step in the process of turning those cues to eat back inward and choosing our own foods based on what our bodies need in that moment. So they are meant to be followed, or I guess kind of taken in the order that they are written in. So we'll kind of explore how it progresses. So starting at step 1 and going all the way down to principle number 10 and how that transition kind of takes place. So principle number 1 is to reject the diet mentality. So the authors of the book really do urge you to get angry at diet culture and all of the lies that it's told you. So here, those lies are that 95% of dieters actually fail. So of course, the lie being that if you follow this diet to a T, you will have sustained weight loss and you will have great health outcomes and whatever other promises they tried to tell you. Since we know this is not the case, the authors of the book really do urge you to get angry at that and choose to combat it. So a great step to take here is to consider where you get your nutrition information. So a lot of times it can be from different books or health magazines or even social media. I think social media is a really big one right now, where there's a lot of nutrition information that may or may not be founded in science. So asking yourself where you're getting your nutrition information, and then also questioning the validity of it. So is it being written by a registered dietitian, or is it being written by maybe someone who really likes the idea of nutrition, but maybe hasn't studied it all too much? And if we feel that there isn't necessarily a lot of evidence to back the nutrition claims that they're making, maybe it's not the best nutrition information to follow. So we would, ask that you would delete your apps that maybe are promoting diet culture, unfollow any accounts that are promoting dieting or weight loss. And then if you need to, throwing out any magazines or books that you have that are promoting the same thing. You also really need to commit to giving up dieting for the rest of your life in this step. So if there's any kind of lingering hope that maybe, I'll try intuitive eating for a while, but I know if I need to down the road, I can just follow another diet. That's really not going to, let you buy into intuitive eating to the extent that you'll benefit from it the most. So we really need to choose that. For me, for the rest of my life, I am choosing to not diet ever again. And here too, it's important to protect your boundaries around food and your body. So we are all our own experts on our own bodies. So if someone is making a comment about maybe what kinds of foods you're choosing or how much food you're choosing, that's fine if that's how they choose to eat, but you are your own expert on your own body. So really these comments aren't helpful and don't help guide, our internal cues in our decisions what to eat and how much to eat. All right, principle number 2 is to honor your hunger. So once we dip below a particular point of hunger, so we're feeling really famished before a meal, that's when we often can see overeating and even binging happening. So this really is a natural and protective process that your body is engaging in if this is something that's happening for you. Your body wants to be fed, and once it reaches a certain point of hunger, it will choose to eat anything that it can in that moment. And this can be really frustrating if you were trying to, limit your intake for certain reasons, and then it causes overeating. So by honoring your hunger, feeding yourself when you're hungry, and keeping yourself within a comfortable level of hunger and fullness at all times, we're really mitigating that urge to overeat and that biological drive to overeat or binge as well. We also need to be aware that, as I said earlier, people who have chronically dieted or restricted their intake might not feel their hunger cues at the beginning. So if that's something that's happening for you, just trying to be aware of that and knowing that our bodies do want to be fed every 3 to 4 hours, and our bodies do want 3 meals and probably some snacks during the day as well. So trying to eat on a schedule, if that's something that works for you, will help the hunger cues come back over time. And a great way to take this principle as well is to prepare for meals and snacks in advance. So oftentimes we aren't thinking about what we're going to have for dinner until we're feeling pretty hungry. And then we have to decide what we're going to cook and if we have the ingredients, or what food we want to order in from a restaurant and wait for that delivery to come. So if we're more prepared in advance and have an idea of what we're going to eat and make sure we have the supplies to make that meal for ourselves or that snack for ourselves, we're really honoring this and not allowing ourselves to dip into that uncomfortable level of hunger at any time. Principle number 3 is to make peace with food. So this is one that I would say is probably the scariest to newcomers to intuitive eating, because this step says that you have unconditional permission to eat any food you're craving at any time. So again, a lot of people new to intuitive eating will say, well, if I let myself have this kind of food, that's my favorite food, that's all I'm ever going to eat for the rest of my life. And I can't live on just that one food alone. So while at the beginning of your intuitive eating journey, you might find that you are craving those foods more than you normally would or more than you would like, that really will level off. This is part of the process that you kind of just have to trust and know that nobody's bodies, no intuitive eater's body is asking only for one type of specific food or one even macronutrient group. So your body does know how to ask for what it wants, and it will level off if you are having more of these cravings than you would like at the beginning. So cognitive restriction can lead to the same kind of urges to overeat and binge as true deprivation. So what this means is if we are stranded in a desert and we are truly deprived of food, we of course would have that drive to overeat or even binge when we do have access to food. If we're telling ourselves that we can't have food or we can't have a particular kind of food, again, we will have that same kind of drive to overeat or to binge when we have access to that specific food. So if we are making peace with food, unconditionally legalizing all types of food, we're really getting in the way of that. And as I said, intentional restriction can backfire in this exact same way. All right, principle number 4 is to challenge the food police. So the food police is that nagging, annoying little voice in your head that's telling you that some foods are good and other foods are bad, and we should strive to only eat good foods and limit quote unquote bad foods, and really cause a lot of cognitive dissonance if you do feel that you might want a food that you deem bad. So we need to reject that any food has moral value. So we need to try to silence that food police by telling him that there is no morality to foods. There's no such thing as a good food. There's no such thing as a bad food. And that all foods are morally neutral. So if these food judgments do arise for you, which again, at the beginning of your intuitive eating journey, that would be completely normal to still feel that you have some of these thoughts coming up. We just try to reframe those. So if it works for you to just say, oh, I recognize that this is the food police speaking to me and there actually is no morality to foods, that's great. But sometimes other reframes can work as well. So I know one that we like to tell our clients and that works for them a lot is reminding ourselves that only our brains know the differences between foods and our bodies don't so much. So an example here is clients will often say, well, I had toast for breakfast and that was bread, so I can't have a sandwich for lunch because if I do, then I'm having bread twice in a day. And the real answer here is that our bodies don't know that it's bread. Our bodies know that it is carbohydrates that they'll break down to glucose. So if we are planning to nourish our bodies to the extent that they want to be nourished, so including some kind of carbohydrate source at all meals, our brains might know that we're having bread twice in a day, which is completely fine. And our bodies are going to say, thank you for the glucose you've given me at breakfast and again at lunch. And that's kind of just the reality of how our bodies break down food. Principle number 5 is to feel your fullness. So I need to add a disclaimer here that if you are in recovery from an eating disorder, sometimes meal plans do necessitate, especially at the beginning of following a meal plan, that you eat past maybe your physiological feeling of fullness. And if that is the case for you, the best practice would be to listen to your registered dietitian and to know that your meal plan is really medicine at the beginning of this journey. So that's for people who have that experience. And for anybody else, sometimes feelings of fullness can be a great indicator that we've had enough to eat and that our bodies are nourished. So trying to listen to those internal cues of fullness changing over the course of a meal can really be a great indicator of, again, if we've received proper nutrition. So it's not so black and white that we are hungry and then we are full and there's nothing in the middle. So just like you see on this little scale here, maybe we start the meal when we have a growling stomach. And over time, I'm feeling neutral. I'm feeling maybe a little satisfied. And finally, I feel biologically and physiologically full. So trying to notice how that's changing over the course of the meal can really allow us to be in touch with our hunger and fullness cues and kind of feeling each of those sensations as they come along. Different mindfulness strategies can work really well here. So trying to turn off the TV or turn off your phone while you're eating, if you're not someone who thinks that distraction is beneficial while you're eating. Also being really aware of the flavors and the textures of the foods that you're eating. So you're really in tune with that food can help us in this process of learning what fullness feels like. Principle number 6 is to discover the satisfaction factor. So I put this picture here because I think it was at some point last year, there was a social media push to replace bread in sandwiches with bell peppers, I'm pretty sure is what it was. So these are some bell pepper sandwiches. So principle number 6 really tells us that to give yourself permission to eat the foods that you really want. So if you are in the mood for a hamburger or a BLT or a different kind of sandwich that has real bread on it, and you decide to eat this bell pepper sandwich, we're really not feeling satisfied, most likely. So if your body wanted that carbohydrate source of the bread and we give it bell pepper, it still knows that it's not quite satiated and that it's missing something. So what often happens here is after you have this bell pepper sandwich, you say, I think I could go for something else, and maybe some grazing starts. And that gets us pretty out of touch with our hunger and fullness cues, and also can be a form of overeating, which might be uncomfortable to some people. So giving yourself permission to eat the foods you really want gets in the way of this and allows you to be very much more kind of in touch with your eating experience and have more pleasure in your eating experience. So just like we saw on the last slide, mindfulness strategies can be really great here. So being aware of the flavors and the textures of the food you're eating, even noticing what it sounds like when you take a crunch of it, or maybe anything else that you're noticing about your food, can be a really great way to tap into the satisfaction of the food you're eating. The caveat here is that not all meals will be perfect, and that's okay. So an example here would be you're on an 8-hour road trip with your friends, say, and the only thing that you can stop to get along the way is a gas station bagel or a rest area slice of pizza, which chances are not going to be the world's most delicious foods you've ever had. That's okay. In those moments, we need to make sure our bodies are fed, and again, not dipping below that point of hunger that would be comfortable and natural for our bodies. And just understanding that nutrition is important in that moment, and there are other meals in the future that will be much more satisfying than that. All right, principle number 7 is to cope with your emotions with kindness. So this principle really is referring to emotional eating. So emotional eating from time to time is completely normal to happen in everyone. At some point, we all emotionally eat to some extent, and food is an emotional and a social thing, so that makes sense. But really, it becomes more of a problem when food is our only strategy we have to cope with negative emotions or sensations that we're not comfortable with. So the way to kind of get in the way of this would be to try to build new coping skills here. So this is work you can do with your therapist or any other team member, even just a trusted loved one, to kind of think about other coping skills you can use in that moment to get you through it, to manage and overcome it. So a great thing to do here is to ask yourself what you really need in that moment. So maybe for some people, when you feel anxious or you feel stressed, it is just hunger. Maybe that is the way that hunger is manifesting itself for you. And in that moment, maybe you really do need food. But other times, maybe when you're feeling lonely, you choose to eat, or when you feel bored, you choose to eat. In those moments, food might not be exactly what your body is asking for. So trying to tune into what your body really needs in that moment and building the coping skills around that can be a really great strategy and a great way to kind of deal with your emotions in a kind way. And of course, if you do emotionally eat in one of these moments, it is completely fine. It is completely natural, and try to be really, really gentle with yourself in those moments. Principle number 8 is to respect your body. So this principle is not asking you to love your body 100% of the time, no matter what. I don't think that's anything anyone on this earth can do. But it is asking that you strive to make peace with your body and respect it and treat it with kindness. So much of the way that our bodies look in terms of shape and size is based in genetics. So an example that the authors give is that we wouldn't expect someone with a size 8 shoe to fit into a size 6 shoe. We would say, why are you making yourself so uncomfortable? Your body biologically is a size 8. And the same can be said for any other parts of our body. So if we are, since bodies are based in genetics, trying to understand that and treat your body with kindness, and be really compassionate towards yourself. The other thing here is that all bodies change over time. So if we can think about a world where everyone looks exactly like they did when they were 18 years old, and that's the way everyone looks for the rest of their lives, I think we can all agree that that would be a pretty strange world, and we wouldn't see any kind of age diversity or any much other kind of body diversity. So trying to wrap our heads around this and understand that bodies do change over time. Bodies are supposed to change over time can be a big one here. It also can be helpful to think about what your body has done for you. So maybe your body has helped you travel the world and take a hike in your favorite place that you've been dying to go all your life. Maybe it's helped you play a sport or do a different activity you love. Or maybe it's even helped you raise a child or birth a child. Those are all really awesome things that our bodies can afford to us that aren't based on the way that they look. So that's a great way to tap into respect for your body. Principle number 9 is exercise, feel the difference. So just like everything we just talked about with eating, exercise can really tie in here too. So trying to focus on forms of movement or exercise that feel good and connect you to your body versus ones that feel militant or feel like they're being imposed by outside sources. So just like there are fad diets, there are also fad exercises. So like SoulCycle maybe is one of them, or other kinds of different movement strategies that people really like for certain periods of time, and then eventually we'll move on to something else. So while those might feel really great to some people, they might not feel really great to other people. So trying to be aware of what feels good to you, what feels natural and comfortable in your body, is really the way to use movement and exercise in a joyful way. So trying to separate exercise and movement that you choose from your body and weight change goals can be a really great strategy here. So not choosing to exercise because you're hoping to change your body shape or size, but choosing to exercise because it feels really good and really comfortable to your body. And finally, principle number 10 is to honor your health with gentle nutrition. So different foods do have different nutrient profiles. That's just a fact. So while we might know that different foods offer us a variety of macro and micronutrients, and some might have more limited nutrient profiles, that's completely okay. So choosing to eat a variety of foods really does ensure that we are getting in all of the nutrients that our bodies need. So it's important here to note that one meal or one day of eating will not drastically change your health by any means. This is particularly important to remember maybe at that early stage of intuitive eating, when you're finding that you're craving a food more than normal and you're worried that, for the rest of my life, I'm going to be eating just this one kind of food. So of course, we know that that's not the case. And even if you do have a period of time that you're eating a particular kind of food more often than you think your body wants or needs it, that's okay. It's certainly not going to dramatically change your health by any means. And just, of course, striving to eat a sufficient quantity of macronutrients at all meals. So this is proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. All of them serve different purposes to our bodies. And we really do need all of them throughout the course of the day, despite what different diets might tell you. So how to get started with intuitive eating? So the first step certainly is to throw out any diet books or magazines you might have lying around. And also, as we said, to unfollow any accounts, even maybe delete entire accounts that feel that they are trying to impose diet culture on you. So weight loss, fitness, anything that maybe doesn't feel good to your body. Of course, reading Intuitive Eating, the book, if that's something that you're interested in, to dive a little bit deeper into the 10 principles and learn more about the research. The latest version, which is the 4th edition, actually came out mid last year. So there's a brand new version out. You can visit our blogs, so the Balance blog and the Redefining Wellness blog. We often have posts about intuitive eating and things related to it right on the website. So you're welcome to check those out for updated information. And last but certainly not least is to consider an intuitive eating coach or group, which, spoiler alert, we do have a group coming up starting next month, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So some additional resources here are what we talked about on the last slide. So Intuitive Eating, the most recent version, is now out. Here's the links to our blogs if you want to check those out. We also actually have this really great non-diet guide through Redefining Wellness. If you'd like to download that ebook, it's available at the link here. You can take a picture of this or you can visit this link later. The non-diet guide has so many contributors actually from the non-diet sphere, and different kinds of articles that have to do with intuitive eating and other just non-diet general stuff. And you can also follow us on Instagram. So if you do unfollow all those diety accounts and find that your feed is a little lacking, please do give us a follow. The Balance and Redefining Wellness ones are here. And then my professional Instagram as well, if you feel inclined to give me a follow. All right. And then just an exciting announcement is that we do have an intuitive eating group starting this February. So it will take place via Zoom on Thursdays from 6 to 7:15 Eastern time. We will go deeper into the 10 principles of intuitive eating and also explore how that relates to the lives and experiences of our group members. So if you're interested in learning more about that group, you can visit this link here. You can also book a discovery call with someone on our admissions team at this bottom link as well. So if you would like to write these links down or take a picture of the slide even, please feel free to check out more information on that group there. All right, so I'll leave this up while I answer some questions. I did see them coming in throughout, and we certainly have time for a few. All right. Let's see. Okay, the first question I see is, so one of the goals of intuitive eating is to eliminate the morality of foods. How do you apply this concept to more processed foods? Do you consider them to be food and therefore have no moral attributes, or that processed food aren't real food and therefore the rule doesn't apply? Your question absolutely makes sense. So this is a question that we get a lot when we're doing intuitive eating coaching. Processed foods are food. Our bodies know what to do with all kinds of foods that we give it. I think the question that comes up here most frequently is that sometimes these foods are processed in a way that is meant to make them more appealing to us. So if this is the case, can I really control my intake of them? And the answer is yes. Just like any other food that we are given, any other food that we're exposed to, our bodies will maybe want them for a period of time, and then that drive to eat them really will start to taper off. And you'll feel that sometimes when I'm exposed to, say, Lay's potato chips, I'm in the mood for them. Sometimes I'm not in the mood for them. When I am in the mood for them, I'll eat them. And when I'm not, I won't. And so, right. So those foods really absolutely can be a player in intuitive eating as well. Great question. Thanks for that. All right. Here's another one. What are some ways to get rid of feeling like certain foods are good and bad, especially when thinking of fried foods or foods that we've been trained to think of as bad, like takeout? So another really great question. And I do want to say that this morality around food piece is certainly one of the biggest challenges when we're starting intuitive eating. I see that a lot of the questions that came in have had to do with that topic. So how do we eliminate the feelings that some foods are good and some foods are bad? As we talked about, really only our brains are aware of the foods we're giving it, and our bodies know that it is macro and micronutrients. So if we're eating, I think you said fried food was an example. So fried food is a food that has been fried in oil, most likely, and it could be maybe a carbohydrate and or protein containing food as well. So when we eat those foods, our bodies are saying, great, you've given me fat, which I can use to fuel different parts of your body, carbohydrates, which I can use to fuel every part of your body, including your brain, which is awesome, and protein to help restore your cells and your muscles and all of those great functions we have. Our bodies aren't saying, gosh, why did you give me French fries? You know French fries are bad. They're saying, great, nutrition. So that's kind of a tricky one to grab a hold of at the beginning, but physiologically, that's really the only way that our bodies see food. And then I know kind of like the second question to that is, but what about, the fat content? Isn't that too high, or isn't that something that I shouldn't eat? Our bodies are going to ask for the foods that they need. So if your body knows that it's had, maybe a sufficient amount of fat for the day, you'll probably feel craving for maybe fruits or vegetables or something that might be lower in fat content, and it's going to even itself out. Our bodies are really, really intelligent in knowing what they need, asking for it, and then kind of giving you that craving. I hope that answers your question. All right. A great question here. Can we apply intuitive eating to someone recovering from anorexia? So this is a really awesome question. And I think the answer to that is there are parts we can apply and there are parts that we can't apply just yet. That doesn't mean you won't be an intuitive eater later down the road. So the parts we can apply are discovering satisfaction in food. So trying to tap into how we feel when we're eating these foods. Starting to try to be aware of our hunger and fullness cues, though they are probably somewhat altered at this point if you are in recovery from anorexia. So trying to tap into that as much as we can. Of course, rejecting the diet mentality would be something that we would want to do. So while there are parts of intuitive eating that maybe we don't want to start to implement in recovery from anorexia, down the road, you'll be able to implement all of it. And there are starting points for right away. All right, we do have time for a few more questions. Let's see. Someone says, the ideology around intuitive eating makes a lot of sense and sounds great, but I imagine it's quite hard to put into action. How can a therapist be more supportive around a client who is hesitant or resistant and all around fearful of enacting intuitive eating? How can our clients get over the hump of fear surrounding food? So great question. It is something that sounds really great on paper and really potentially scary when we start to put it into practice. So my recommendation here would be to make sure that there's a support system in place for the person who is starting intuitive eating. So intuitive eating is absolutely counter to everything that diet culture, otherwise known as most of society, is telling you. So there is a lot of fear coming up for people who are starting intuitive eating a lot of the time, and also potentially feelings of isolation. So if you're choosing to, trust your own instincts of what your body's asking for, well, maybe all of your friends are still following diet culture's rules. It can feel really isolating sometimes. So it's important to make sure you do have a solid support system around you. So whether that is a therapist or even just loved ones, a dietitian, anyone who you think is kind of more willing to buy into this intuitive eating approach is super important here. So you can talk with them when you're starting this journey. It also can be helpful to work with an intuitive eating registered dietitian or a coach to kind of guide you through this process, because there certainly will be times that you do maybe have more food judgments coming up and you feel yourself maybe slipping back into diet culture a little bit. And the registered dietitian or the coach can really help you set goals around maybe challenge foods to try that week, or other goals that might work for you in this process of starting intuitive eating. So those would be my recommendations. And I hope oh, you also asked how a therapist can be more supportive of a client who is starting this. So again, kind of acting as a support system to this person and knowing that there will be some fear and anxiety coming up for them, and just really opening the floor for them to be able to discuss everything that's coming up, and also providing the reassurance that intuitive eating does start to come very naturally once you've been following the approach for a longer period of time. So kind of trusting the process and letting them lean on you for support would be my recommendation. All right. Let's see. We have so many great questions. I want to make sure I'm touching on a bunch of different topics. Is intuitive eating suitable for those with chronic illnesses such as type 2 diabetes? So another excellent question. The answer is absolutely yes. There is a place for it. So there is some research specifically on different chronic diseases and intuitive eating. I didn't include it here just for the sake of kind of making this for a broader audience, but there is quite a good deal of research to back intuitive eating in different populations, including type 2 and type 1 diabetes. So certainly, if you're interested in that research, I would recommend looking into it more closely for your particular situation. But I can say, yes, there are definitely dietitians who will work with chronic illness that might be related to food, and also an intuitive eating approach. So the answer is yes. All right, I think we have time for about one more question, maybe two more. So let's take this one. Is teaching others how to meal plan and prep considered diet culture if they have been in a lifestyle of not eating regular meals and eating or overeating at night? So another excellent question. Sometimes meal plans can be supportive to people who are starting intuitive eating, as long as there's room for flexibility as well. So I think I mentioned earlier that for people who are in recovery from an eating disorder specifically, meal plans really are your best friend in that moment, and letting that be the guide of how much and when to eat can be really, really supportive to recovery in those moments. So in that case, a meal plan would probably trump intuitive eating just for the time that it was necessary. And again, meal plans aren't necessarily forever. So if at any point their dietitian or rest of their team felt they could come off of that meal plan and be more intuitive eaters, that would be fine. So it sounds like the person you're mentioning is someone who isn't eating regular meals and then is overeating at night. So if they're not eating regular meals, chances are their body senses that deprivation and is having that natural and protective process like we talked about, and is saying, I need to eat a lot at night because I wasn't fed during the day, and that means my body's in danger. So your body doesn't want to be in danger. Your body wants to be safe, which would mean fed in this point. So if they haven't been eating regular meals, the way to kind of mitigate that could be to say, how can we set goals around eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner, adding in snacks throughout the day, so you're not dipping past that certain comfortable level of hunger during the day, which is probably a driver of the overeating at night. So that can be a great tool to use when starting intuitive eating, I guess, is the answer. You can, follow a meal plan for a period of time until that client feels ready to kind of shy away from the meal plan and start to use their instincts a little bit more. All right, I'll take one more question. We do have a lot here. Let's see. I eat out of emotion right when I wake up and can't stop this behavior. It sets me off on the wrong foot. Have you ever heard anyone say this, and any advice? So I would say here, my best advice would be to really try to check in with yourself. And like I said earlier, check in and see what your body might really need in that moment. So maybe your body isn't necessarily eating out of emotion, but it's eating out of hunger that you just slept for however many hours, and it's simply hungry for breakfast. So that could be something. It could also be something completely different, and as you're saying, related to an emotional driver. So if it is a more emotional driver, I would encourage you to explore that with a therapist or another loved one and see what your body might really be needing in those moments, and start to develop those coping skills for other ways to deal with that negative emotion or uncomfortable sensation other than using food. And again, I do want to emphasize, emotional eating from time to time is so normal for everybody. So if you do eat emotionally, sometimes be very gentle with yourself, because that is something that everyone will experience at some point. All right. So if there are any other questions that come up, you can always feel free to reach out to us at Balance, and we are happy to, see what we can do to support you in any way. And yeah, the link to book a discovery call with our admissions team is right here. So if you ever feel like reaching out and seeing how we might be able to support you in other ways, we are more than happy to do so. All right, so that concludes our webinar for today. Thank you all so much for attending. It was such a pleasure to host you all and to answer your questions. We hope to hear from you at Balance, and looking forward to seeing you at the next webinar that's coming up in a few weeks.